Nathaniel Voss, the youngest Chief Justice ever appointed to the British Columbia Court of Appeal, found his missing wife sorting mail in the back room of a rural post office in a town so small it did not appear on the provincial highway map. She was wearing a fleece vest the color of old mustard and reading glasses he had never seen before. And when she looked up, the first thing she said was not his name. The first thing she said was, "I asked you not to." He had been driving since 4 in the morning. The conference in Kelowna had ended a day early. A procedural matter had collapsed mid-argument, and the presiding panel had adjourned until Monday. His clerk had offered to arrange a car. Nathaniel had said no. He liked the drive back through the interior. He always had. The highway through the mountains at that hour was the only place where his mind went genuinely quiet, where the case files and the appointment calendar and the ambient weight of public appointment fell off him like a coat dropped at the door. He had pulled off the highway sometime after 6, somewhere past the second provincial park sign, looking for coffee. The town was called Harrow Creek. It had a gas station, a Legion Hall with a hand-painted sign, a pharmacy with a closed notice taped to the glass, and at the end of the short gravel main street, a Canada Post outlet tucked inside a hardware store that smelled of rubber and wood smoke. He had not gone in for the post office. He had gone in for the coffee machine he could see through the window. He had been a husband for 9 months. He had been a husband without a wife for 21 months. He pushed open the hardware store door. A small bell above it rang. The man behind the counter, broad-shouldered, in his 60s, with a white beard and the careful eyes of someone who has run a small business long enough to read people quickly, looked up and nodded once. Nathaniel nodded back. He went to the coffee machine near the window. He pressed the button for dark roast. He watched the cup fill. The door to the back room was half open. He did not look through it on purpose. He was picking up the coffee cup when the woman in the back room reached up to a high shelf and pulled down a plastic bin of rubber bands, and he saw her hands first, and then the line of her shoulder, and then the pale blue fleece vest, and then the glasses, and then her face in profile. He set the coffee cup down on the counter without drinking it. He was still standing there when she turned around and saw him through the half-open door. She did not move. She did not drop the bin. Her hands held it very steadily. She looked at him the way a person looks at something they have been half expecting and wholly dreading. "I asked you not to," she said. His name was Nathaniel Voss, and he had spent 21 months being a public fact. His wife's disappearance had been reported with the particular relish that attaches to any private difficulty experienced by a person who holds public office. He had attended every sitting. He had issued no statements. He had let his clerk handle the press with a single line. The Chief Justice considers this a personal matter and has nothing to add. He had gone home every evening to a house on the west side that still had her running shoes by the front door, because he could not bring himself to move them. He walked to the half-open door. He put his hand on the frame. "Imogen," he said. She put the bin of rubber bands down on the sorting shelf. She did not take off the glasses. She looked at him with an expression that was not surprise and not relief and not guilt. It was something quieter and harder to name. It was the expression of a person who has been doing something difficult alone for a very long time and has just had the door opened on it. "I wasn't finished," she said. He stood in the doorway without moving. He did not know what to do with his face. He had prepared, over 21 months, approximately 40 different versions of this conversation. None of them had begun with her telling him she was not finished. "Tell me what you're not finished with," he said. She shook her head once. "Not yet. There's one thing I can't tell you today. I will tell you. I will tell you everything. But not today. I need 3 more months." He stayed in the doorway. "You were going to come back in 3 months, he said. She did not answer. "Imogen." "I was going to be in a position to come back," she said carefully. "Whether I was going to or not was a decision I was going to make when I could make it freely. I haven't been able to make it freely until now." Almost. He looked at her. She had cut her hair shorter, just past her jaw. She had lost weight he could see in her collarbones. She was wearing, in addition to the vest and the glasses, a pair of dark canvas trousers and flat-soled boots he did not recognize. She looked tired in the way of someone who has been doing physical work for a long time and has stopped noticing it. She also looked, in some quality he could not immediately articulate, more settled in her own skin than the woman who had stood beside him at the ceremony at Government House 11 months before her disappearance. The man at the counter, whose name Nathaniel would later learn was Mr. Kowalczyk, was pretending very carefully to read a parts catalogue. "I'll wait," Nathaniel said. She closed her eyes briefly. "There's no need. I'll wait until your shift is done, Nathaniel. What time do you finish?" A pause. 2 o'clock. He went back to the coffee machine. He pressed the button again. He took the fresh cup to the single wooden chair beside the window and sat down. He opened his phone and turned it face down on his knee and looked at the mountains through the glass. She did not come out of the back room for the first hour. He could hear her moving. The soft shuffle of envelopes, the click of a scanner, the quiet of someone doing work they have done enough times that it no longer requires thought. At 8:30, an older woman came in for a package. At 9, 2 men in workwear came in for propane fittings. At 9:30, a girl of about 12 came in with a handful of birthday cards to send. She went to the post office wicket at the back. Imogen came out and served her, and helped to count the stamps and told her the one with the monarch butterfly was her favorite. The girl left. Imogen went back through the door without looking at the chair by the window. Mr. Kowalczyk brought Nathaniel a second coffee at 10 without being asked. He set it on the windowsill. He said nothing. He went back behind the counter. At 2 o'clock, Imogen came out of the back room with her jacket over her arm and a canvas tote on her shoulder. She stopped in front of his chair. "I live on Birch Street," she said. "The house with the green mailbox, it's 4 blocks. I walk because the truck is at the garage until Thursday. You can walk with me if you want. I need to change out of this vest. And then I'll make tea and we can talk." He stood up. He said goodbye to Mr. Kowalczyk. He held the hardware store door open. They walked out onto the gravel main street in the pale October light, not touching, not speaking. He had not been this close to her in 21 months. She smelled of paper and something herbal he did not recognize. Something that was not the perfume he had kept deliberately on her side of the bathroom counter. This was something she had chosen herself in a life he had not been part of. The house on Birch Street was a rental. A small white bungalow with a covered porch and 2 Adirondack chairs that had been there long before she arrived. Inside, a kitchen table, a second-hand sofa, a bookshelf made from planks and cinder blocks, and on the windowsill above the sink, a small framed photograph of her grandmother standing in a garden somewhere in Nova Scotia. She had taken nothing from their house in Vancouver when she left. He knew this because he had catalogued it, in the first terrible weeks, with a thoroughness that shamed him now. She put the kettle on. She told him to sit at the kitchen table. She went to the bedroom. He heard a drawer open and close. He kept his eyes on the table. He had imagined the room she was sleeping in many times. He had imagined, in the worst versions, rooms that belonged to other people. He had imagined, in the versions that were merely painful, beach towns and coastal cities and the kind of furnished apartment that looks like no one ever really lived there. He had not imagined a bungalow with a cinder block bookshelf and a frost-edged vegetable garden going dormant through a window. She came back in a grey wool sweater, her face washed, her hair loose. She made tea in 2 mismatched mugs and set one in front of him and sat down across the table with her knees drawn up on the chair. "Ask me whatever you want to ask," she said. "But there is one thing I can't answer today. Everything else I'll answer. Why did you leave? That's the one thing." He sat with that for a moment. "Then tell me what you can." She wrapped both hands around her mug. She looked at the surface of the tea. "I have been here for 14 months, she said. "I came here from a town in the Peace River country where I worked for 6 months at a feed cooperative. Before that, I spent 3 months in Edmonton, first at a women's resource center, then at a temp agency. I left Vancouver the morning after the reception for your swearing-in ceremony. I left because someone told me something the night before that I could not unknow and could not tell you, and could not remain near you while I tried to address it. I've been addressing it. I'm 3 months from being done." She looked up. "I haven't been with anyone else. I haven't accessed our joint accounts. I have a checking account at the credit union here under my mother's maiden name. There is $412 in it. I work 4 days a week at the post office. I help with the books for the Legion on Thursday evenings. I read. I don't have a smartphone. I cancelled the data plan 18 months ago. I haven't seen a photograph of you in 7 months. I told myself you had stopped looking. I needed to believe that." He set his mug down. He pressed the heels of his palms against the edge of the table. "You said there's something you can't tell me today." "Yes. Will you tell me when you can?" "Yes. In 3 months, when I've finished, I'll tell you everything. Then you can make whatever decisions you need to make, about all of it." He looked at her. "Is it a person?" She was quiet for a moment. "It is a person, and it isn't only a person. It's something a person did a long time ago, and then again recently, that has been moving through your professional life without you knowing it. I needed to be unfindable for long enough to stop it cleanly, without it ever touching your name in the record. I'm almost there." 3 months, he said. 3 months. He stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the dormant garden. He could see the skeleton of a tomato cage still standing, a curl of dead vine wrapped around the wire. "I'm not going to ask you to come home," he said. "And I'm going to find a room at whatever passes for an inn in this town, and I'm going to be here. I'll eat wherever people eat. I'll stay out of your way at work. At the end of 3 months, when you've done what you need to do, you can tell me everything and I will listen. And we'll decide together what comes next. But I'm not going somewhere I can't be reached when you're 40 minutes from the highway alone." She was quiet for a long time. "You have a docket," she said. "Cases. A court that sits on Monday. I have a deputy who has been asking me to take leave for 18 months. He'll be relieved. You have a life in Vancouver." "I have a calendar in Vancouver," he said. "I had a life. You're sitting across from me right now." She closed her eyes. "All right," she said. "All right." He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the knob. He turned around. "Imogen." "Yes, the running shoes," he said. "By the front door. I haven't moved them." She went very still. "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't tell me things like that yet. I won't be able to finish what I'm doing if you tell me things like that yet." He nodded. "I'm sorry." He left. The only place to stay in Harrow Creek was a 4-room bed and breakfast 2 streets over, run by a woman named Mrs. Aberfoyle, who had a ginger cat and strong opinions about breakfast times and asked no questions beyond the necessary ones. He paid for 2 weeks in cash. He said he was a writer working through something difficult and needed quiet. Mrs. Aberfoyle said that described approximately a third of her guests and showed him to a room with a pine dresser and a window facing east. He drove the next morning to a town 40 minutes south that had a proper grocery and a Canadian Tire. He bought work pants, flannel shirts in dark plaid, a down vest, wool socks, and a pair of insulated boots. He bought a small notebook with a brown cover. He bought a prepaid phone for emergencies and turned off his regular one. He drove back. He walked to the hardware store at 11. He bought a bag of bird seed so that he had a reason to be there. He stood in the seed aisle for 10 minutes reading the labels. He had never filled a bird feeder in his life. He ate lunch at the only restaurant in town, a diner called the Copper Kettle, run by a woman who introduced herself simply as June and who poured coffee without asking and used the word hon with the blunt warmth of someone who means it but expects nothing sentimental in return. He ate dinner there too. He sat in the corner booth. He tipped fairly. He didn't sit at the counter. On the 3rd day, he began to learn the shape of the town. He learned that the postmaster, Mr. Kowalczyk, had run the hardware store for 30 years after inheriting it from his father-in-law, and that his wife had died 4 winters ago, and that he drove 40 minutes every Sunday to have dinner with his daughter's family in Fort St. John. He learned that June at the Copper Kettle had 3 grown children and had been running the diner alone since her husband retired to tend their property north of town, and that she and Mr. Kowalczyk played cribbage on Wednesday evenings at the Legion, and had done so for 20 years. And that neither of them would ever admit to what that meant. He learned that there was a boy of about 14 named Paulie who delivered papers in the mornings and who had recently saved up enough for a used snowboard and who showed it to anyone who lingered near the hardwest long enough to be shown. He learned that Imogen was trusted here, not loudly, not conspicuously. She was not the center of anything, but she was the person who had set up the Legion's bookkeeping system when their previous volunteer moved to Kamloops, and the person who checked in on old Mr. Ibarra every Tuesday because his family was in Ontario and his hip had been troubling him, and the person who had, without anyone asking her to, started a small informal reading circle at the library branch that met on the 2nd Saturday of every month, and had a waiting list. He was in the Copper Kettle on the 5th evening when a man came in whose truck had slid off the gravel shoulder 2 kilometers out, and who needed someone to call a tow because his phone was dead. It was Imogen, clearing the adjacent table, who had the tow company's number already in her head, who called it, who poured the man a coffee while he waited, and who, when the tow driver arrived and the man discovered he was $40 short, quietly covered the difference and waived off the repayment. She walked past Nathaniel's table on her way back to the kitchen. He held the door for the tow driver without speaking to her. As the door swung closed, she touched the back of his hand briefly with 2 fingers. Then she went behind the counter. He stood outside on the gravel for a moment with the cold air on his face, not moving, and then he went back to Mrs. Aberfoyle's and sat on the edge of the bed in his work clothes, and did not sleep for a long time. It was on the 11th day that he began to understand what she had been doing. He had a habit, 30 years in law, of returning to the sentence that did not fit, the one phrase that sits wrong in an otherwise plausible argument. He had been turning one over since the first morning in the hardware store. Something a person did that has been moving through your professional life, not his personal life, his professional life. He called his clerk, Alana, from the prepaid phone. He told her he was on leave and unavailable for non-urgent matters, and that she should route everything through the Deputy Chief Justice. Then he said, carefully, that he needed her to do one thing for him. He needed her to pull, quietly and without routing the request through any of the usual channels, the complete file history of his swearing-in reception. Not the ceremony itself, the reception, the guest list, the catering firm, the event coordination company, the security clearances. Alana, who had been his clerk for 9 years, and who had learned, through practice, to process his stranger requests without visible reaction, said she would have it within 48 hours. She had it in 36. He read it at the pine dresser in the morning light, 3 pages of names and firms. Most of it was exactly what it appeared to be. The caterers were a legitimate Vancouver company with a 20-year track record. The security firm was the standard provincial contractor. The event coordination had been handled by a boutique firm called Creston & Associates. He did not recognize the name. He called Alana back. He asked her to pull everything publicly available on Creston & Associates. She called back 2 hours later. Creston & Associates had been registered in BC 4 years ago. Its sole director of record was a woman named Judith Creston. Judith Creston had no public profile, no professional association memberships, no other registered business interests. The registered address was a mail forwarding service. He sat with that for a while. Then he called Alana again. He asked her to check whether any of the other events on his public calendar in the 18 months before his wife's disappearance had used Creston & Associates. 4 of them had. He closed the notebook he had been writing in. He looked out the east-facing window at the frost on the Adirondack chairs in Mrs. Aberfoyle's garden. He thought about the sentence again. Something a person did that has been moving through your professional life. He thought about Imogen, 8 months before she left, coming home from a function she had attended on his behalf. A museum fundraiser he had been unable to attend. She had been quiet that evening, he had asked. She had said she was tired. He understood suddenly that she had not been tired. She had been calculating. He walked to the copper kettle. It was the slow hour. June was restocking the pie case. He sat in the corner booth and waited. Imogen came in at 3:30, off her shift. She saw him. She unzipped her jacket and sat down across from him. He set the notebook on the table. He did not open it. Creston & Associates, he said. She looked at the notebook. She looked at his face. She let out a breath that had been held, he suspected, for a very long time. "How much do you know?" she said. "Enough to understand the shape of it. Tell me the rest." She wrapped her hands around the coffee June had brought without being asked. She looked at the table. When she looked up, her voice was level and her eyes were not. "His name is Gregory Fane," she said. "He was my mother's business partner when I was a child. After she died when I was 15, he managed the estate. There was nothing left of it by the time I turned 19, and he had documentation for all of it. I stopped thinking about Gregory Fane." She paused. "He came to the reception the night before your swearing-in ceremony. Not as a guest, as part of the coordination staff. I saw him across the room. He was 20 years older than when I last saw him, and he was wearing a staff lanyard, and I knew immediately, in the way you know things you have trained yourself not to know, that he was not there by accident." Nathaniel did not speak. He found me before the evening was over. He told me he had been building something for 4 years, using your public calendar and the event coordination access to attach a legitimate-looking financial instrument to each of the 4 events he had staffed. Small amounts, the kind that looked like standard honorarium processing, routed through accounts registered to a shell company with your name attached as a signatory, via forged authorization documents that had been papered through the coordination firm. He showed me the documents on his phone. Standing in a corridor outside the coat room, she picked up her coffee. She set it down. He told me that if I said nothing, the instruments would run quietly for another 3 years and then dissolve. He told me that if I said anything, or if I went to you, he would release the documents to the Judicial Council the following morning. The timing was specific. Your appointment was to be formalized in a public ceremony in 11 days. He had calculated it. He knew that a formal complaint to the Judicial Council 11 days before a public appointment formalization would not be dismissed quietly, regardless of the merit. The press would have it within hours. The appointment would be suspended pending review. Your career, even cleared eventually, would carry it. She set her hands flat on the table. I went upstairs. I sat in the hotel room. I thought about waking you. I thought about calling the RCMP. I thought about calling your clerk, your deputy, the Attorney General's office. Every option I could find required revealing the documents before I had any way to challenge them. And he had been doing this for 4 years. The paper trail was deep. The only way to unwind it without it destroying you in the process was to unwind it from the outside, from somewhere he couldn't see, under a name he couldn't trace back to you. Nathaniel looked at the notebook on the table between them. The morning after the reception, she said, "I transferred nothing. I took nothing. I left the hotel with my purse and my coat. I sent you a text from my phone and then I removed the SIM and threw it in a bin on Granville Street. The text said, 'I'm sorry. Please don't look for me yet. I love you. I'm going to fix it.'" He had read that text 400 times. He had read it until the words stopped being words and became a shape he traced with his eyes, because the shape was all he had. "I know," he said. "I saved it." She closed her eyes for a moment. "Tell me what you did next," he said. She told him. She told him about the resource center in Edmonton, where she had spent the first 3 weeks reading corporate law at the public library terminal for 4 hours every afternoon, working backward through the financial instruments, finding the registration structure. She told him about finding, eventually, the shell company's registration filing, which had been submitted using a notarized authorization form that bore Nathaniel's name on a document he had genuinely signed, at the reception, in a routine portfolio of event acknowledgement forms. The authorization had been forged onto the back pages. The notarization was from a commissioner who, on investigation, turned out to have been Gregory Fane's university roommate. She told him about the process she had spent 18 months building. The only clean way to dissolve the instruments, she said, without Nathaniel appearing anywhere in the dissolution, was for the shell company itself to be struck from the corporate registry for deficient filing, on a complaint brought by an independent third party who had standing because she held, still in her own name before her marriage, a minority interest in a dormant holding company that her mother had registered when Imogen was a child, a holding company that Fane, in his original structuring, had made the technical error of listing as a beneficial interest in the shell. He had thought it would help legitimize the registration. He had not remembered that the beneficial interest holder had legal standing to challenge the filing. "It took me 14 months to confirm the standing," she said. 3 months to prepare the complaint. "I filed it 6 weeks ago. The registrar reviewed it. The shell company is being struck next month. When it's struck, the instruments dissolve. The forged authorization becomes a dead document attached to a dead entity. Your name disappears from the record." She looked at him. "Fane doesn't know I filed. He doesn't know who filed. The complaint is under my mother's maiden name. He's been watching the Vancouver papers for any sign of exposure. There hasn't been one. He thinks it's still running. In 3 months it will be over. The registrar will send notice. The instruments will have dissolved. Whatever he does after that, whatever he tries, he will have nothing that touches you. Nothing that touches either of us." Nathaniel sat very still for a long time. "You did this alone," he said. "Yes, without a lawyer. With a corporate law textbook and a library card and the registrar's public guidance documents," she said. "And 14 months of mornings." He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. He breathed. "You were right," he said. "If you had come to me, I would have hired people. I would have made it about the complaint. I would have made it adversarial and visible, and he would have released the documents within the week. You knew that, yes. You were the only person who could do this the way it needed to be done." She said nothing. He took his hands away from his eyes. He looked at her. "You are," he said, "the sharpest person I have ever sat across from. And I sit across from a great many sharp people professionally. I want you to know that I understand now every decision you made from the night of the reception forward. And I want you to know that I am sorry. I'm sorry that the shape of what I'd built around my career made it more useful for you to disappear than to trust me with it. I'm sorry I wasn't a person you could wake up in the hotel room." She was crying now, quietly, without drama. The tears ran down and she did not wipe them. "There was nothing wrong with the person I could wake up," she said. "I knew you. I knew what you would do. What you would do was right, and it would have destroyed both of us. That's not a flaw. That's just the situation he created." He reached across the table and took her hands. He held them. June, behind the counter, had turned the sign in the window to closed at some point in the past half hour. She was running a cloth along the counter with her back turned, in the particular way of a person who is giving someone privacy inside a room she owns. 3 months, he said. 3 months. What do I do that doesn't put any of it at risk? She thought. She looked down at their joined hands and then up at his face. You stay here, she said. You stay as the writer from Vancouver who needs quiet. You eat at June's. You don't call your clerk about this. You don't look any further into Creston and Associates. You don't contact any journalist, any counsel, anyone. You let me drive to Prince George alone next month for a registration review appointment. I'll be back the same day. After the shell is struck, I'll come home with you. And fain she shook her head slightly. The standing complaint is anonymous. He'll see the striking notice when the registrar publishes it. He'll understand what happened. He won't know who did it, and he won't be able to prove anything actionable, because the complaint was procedurally clean and the standing was real. What he does after that is a matter for the Financial Crimes Unit, which will eventually notice the pattern the dissolved instruments left. That investigation will not involve you. I've been careful. She paused. He will know that someone close to you did this. He may guess it was me. But without the instruments, he has no leverage and no document. He has nothing. All right, Nathaniel said. All right. He did not go back to Vancouver. I stayed at Mrs. Aberfoyle's. He learned the rhythms of Harrow Creek, the way you learn a piece of music you were not taught, by listening until you know where it breathes. He learned that Paulie came by the copper kettle on Friday afternoons, and that June kept a cinnamon bun back for him without being asked. He learned that Mr. Kowalczyk left his outdoor light on all night in winter, so that anyone coming off the highway in trouble would have a point of reference. He learned that the second Saturday reading circle that Imogen ran had a core of 8 women, and one retired school teacher named Mr. Albright, who brought shortbread and never spoke during the discussion, but always stayed to help stack the chairs. He ate his meals at June's. He sat in the corner booth. He read. He wrote long letters in the brown notebook that he intended to give Imogen eventually, when the time was right. On the 14th day, there was a cold snap, sharp enough to freeze the standing water in the ruts on the gravel road behind the bungalow. Imogen's truck came back from the garage. On the evening it came back, she drove past Mrs. Aberfoyle's and stopped and knocked. He answered the door in the flannel shirt and the wool socks. I thought you might want to see the ridge, she said. There's a pull-off 20 minutes north. On clear nights you can see the Rockies past the provincial boundary. I haven't gone yet because I didn't have the truck. He got his down vest. They drove north on the highway with the heater running and a CBC radio program about migratory birds playing low. She drove the way she sorted mail, efficiently and without fuss. The pull-off was a gravel apron cut into the shoulder with a low railing of peeled logs. She stopped the truck and they got out and looked east. The Rockies were there, pale and enormous against the dark, lit at the edges by a moon that had just cleared the tree line. Nathaniel had grown up in Vancouver. He had seen the mountains all his life as a backdrop. He had never seen them from here, from this far into the interior, from a gravel pull-off at 9 o'clock in October, with his wife standing 6 inches to his left and her breath making small clouds in the cold. I come here in the morning sometimes, she said. Before my shift, Mr. Kowalczyk told me about it in my first week. How did he know that you needed it? She was quiet a moment. I think he just told everybody, and I was the one who kept coming back. A truck went past on the highway below, its lights moving west. Imogen, he said, yes, when this is over, wherever we land, I want us to have a place like this. Not this specific town, if that's not what you want. But somewhere with a ridge you can drive to at 9 in the morning and see something that puts everything in proportion. She turned and looked at him. She was wearing a toque pulled down to her eyebrows and a scarf he recognized from the early days of their marriage. Before everything, a thick grey wool one she had bought at the Granville Island market. All right, she said. He did not reach for her hand. She reached for his. They stood there in the cold for another 10 minutes. Then she drove him back and dropped him at Mrs. Aberfoyle's and went home. He sat on the edge of the bed in his work clothes for a long time, not moving, watching the frost form on the inside edge of the east-facing window. He called his deputy the next morning from the prepaid phone. He said he was extending his leave by another 10 weeks. The deputy said he was glad Nathaniel was taking the time and that everything was in hand and to please not call again before January. The warmth in his voice was genuine. Nathaniel thanked him and hung up. The complaint review appointment in Prince George was on a Tuesday in late November. Imogen drove alone. She had dressed carefully, a plain charcoal suit from a consignment shop in Fort St. John, her hair pinned, the reading glasses in her bag because they made her look, she had once said, like someone's competent aunt, which was exactly the impression she wanted. She carried a folder she had assembled herself, procedurally precise, with every supporting document tabbed and cross-referenced. She signed in at the corporate registry office under her mother's maiden name. She waited on a chair in the hall. She was called in. She sat across from a registrar's officer, who was thorough and unhurried, and who asked her 4 questions, all of which she answered clearly. The officer confirmed the standing. He confirmed the deficiency in the original filing. He stamped the complaint accepted for processing. She was back in Harrow Creek by 6 o'clock. She texted Nathaniel from the truck, in the hardware store parking lot. One word on the prepaid phone she kept only for this. done. He was at Mrs. Aberfoyle's. He read the word. He sat with it. He put the phone face down on the pine dresser. He walked to the copper kettle. June was cashing out the till. She looked up when he came in. She read his face the way she had been reading faces across a counter for 30 years. "Sit down, On," she said. "I'll put the kettle on." He sat. She made tea. He did not explain anything. She did not ask. She sat across from him with her own mug, and they drank tea in the quiet of the closed diner until Imogen's truck pulled into the lot outside, and her boots came up the steps. She came in still in the charcoal suit, her hair still pinned, her face very pale and very calm. She stopped inside the door. She looked at Nathaniel. She looked at June. June stood up. She put her mug in the bus bin. She put on her coat. She said goodnight to both of them, and she went out, and Nathaniel heard her truck start in the lot and the sound of it going down the road. He stood up. She crossed the diner in 4 steps, and she put her forehead against his shoulder, and she stood there for a long moment without speaking. He put his hand against the back of her head, carefully, the way you hold something you were afraid you had lost. They stood like that in the empty diner until the furnace clicked off and the room settled into the particular quiet of a small-town night. 3 months later, on a clear morning in late February, Nathaniel carried 2 boxes down the fire escape at the back of the bungalow on Birch Street and loaded them into the truck. There was not much to carry. She had accumulated the kind of life that fits into 2 boxes, which she had suspected would be the case, and which she did not find sad. The books she had bought at the Harrow Creek Library sale. A good knife she had found at the thrift store in Fort St. John. The wool blanket from the foot of the bed that had been there when she moved in, but that Mr. Kowalczyk had, in his quietly deliberate way, told her when she tried to return it that he had no use for, and had always meant to give away. Her grandmother's photograph. Mr. Kowalczyk came out of the hardware store when he heard the truck running. He stood on the step. He shook Nathaniel's hand first, with both of his, the way a man shakes the hand of someone whose worth he has been quietly assessing, and has found sufficient. Then he hugged Imogen briefly, and told her the post office would not recover from her departure for at least a year, which Imogen understood to be a generous overstatement and received accordingly. Paulie came running around the corner of the building on his snowboard, which was impractical on gravel, but which he used anyway, and said, "Is it true you're leaving?" And Imogen said yes. And Paulie said that was objectively the worst news of the winter. And Imogen laughed and told him she was sending him something in the mail, and he should watch the box. June came out of the copper kettle in her apron, and stood on the step and folded her arms and looked at them both, with the expression of a woman who has seen a great many things come and go in a small town, and has long since stopped trying to speed any of it along or hold any of it back. "You'll come back," June said. It was not a question. "In the summer," Imogen said. "We'll be here for the long weekend in July. I want to see the garden when the fireweed comes in." June nodded. She went back inside. The copper kettle's open sign flipped on in the window a moment later. They drove south on the highway, through the mountains, through the long thinning of the interior into the Fraser Valley, through the slow, familiar thickening of traffic that meant the city was close. Imogen drove the first half. Nathaniel drove the second. She fell asleep somewhere past Cache Creek, with her cheek against the window, and her hands folded in her lap, and he drove the rest of the way, listening to the radio very low, and watching the mountains come down around the highway, and thinking about nothing in particular, which was something he had not been able to do before Harrow Creek, and which he intended, going forward, to practice. The shell company was formally struck from the registry on the 2nd Tuesday of March. The notice was published in the standard way. The instruments attached to it dissolved without ceremony. Gregory Fane, wherever he was, received the notice in whatever way such men receive the evidence that a structure they spent 4 years building has been quietly, procedurally, and completely undone by a woman they underestimated. He did not contact them. He did not surface publicly. The Financial Crimes Unit, in its own time and on its own schedule, began to trace the pattern the dissolved instruments had left. That inquiry did not touch Nathaniel Voss. It did not touch Imogen Voss. It touched, eventually, a man who had spent 30 years being careful and had made, in the end, one significant miscalculation, which was that he had not accounted for the particular tenacity of someone who loved a person more than they feared him. Nathaniel made a brief statement through his office, when the time was right and Alana had reviewed every word. A private matter involving fraudulent documents had been resolved through proper channels. The Chief Justice had nothing further to add. Thank you. The press cycle lasted 2 days. By Thursday it was over. The summer in Harrow Creek was everything Imogen had promised. The fireweed came in along the highway in long pink waves in July. They stayed for 10 days. They sat on the Legion Hall steps on the evening of the long weekend and listened to a local band play covers and ate corn on the cob and watched Paulie attempt, with increasing confidence and decreasing success, to teach Mrs. Aberfoyle's grandchildren to ollie on the gravel. June brought out coffee at 9 and sat down between them and said nothing for a long while, and then said the town looked better with them in it, and Nathaniel said they'd keep coming back, and June said she knew and went to get the pie. Later, when the evening had cooled and Paulie had taken the grandchildren home, and Mr. Kowalczyk had walked past on his way to wherever Mr. Kowalczyk went. On summer evenings, Nathaniel and Imogen walked back to the bungalow on Birch Street that Mrs. Kowalczyk's sister rented out in summer and stood for a moment on the covered porch, with the Adirondack chairs and the sound of the creek 2 blocks over. They had been married for 9 months and 21 months, and a long winter in a town called Harrow Creek, and the rest of whatever came after that. Imogen, he said. Yes, I was hoping you'd be here tonight. She turned to look at him. The porch light was on, a moth was circling it. Down the street, a screen door opened and someone called a dog home and the dog came. She had been hoping for longer than that, she said. She had been hoping, if she was honest, since the morning she sat in the hotel corridor outside the coat room and understood exactly what she was going to have to do, and understood that she was going to do it, and understood that the only reason she was going to do it was standing 1 floor up in a hotel room she had just walked away from, and that the only way back to that room was to first walk a very long way in the other direction. She had been hoping since then. If you have stayed with Platinum Files through this story, please let us know in the comments which moment stayed with you longest. Leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss a new story next week. We'll be here.